All right, so we're on day 20 now, or if I may, Japanese counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 18, 19, 10, 10. So I found out yesterday, of course, International Men's Day. So let's get this a global awareness day for many issues that men face, including abuse, homelessness, suicide, and violence, celebrated anyway on November 19th. The objectives of celebrating International Men's Day are set up in all the six pillars of International Men's Day. It's also an occasion to celebrate boys and men's lives, achievements, and contributions, in particular for the contribution to nation, union, society, community, family, marriage, and child care. Uh, and I found out in this Wikipedia article that this particular day actually has ties to my alma mater, which, okay. So, so those six pillars that they talked about, here they are. International Men's Day's objectives are given as one, to promote positive male role models, not just movie stars and sportsmen, but everyday working class men who are living decent, honest lives. I think for the most part we do that on this podcast, but but and of course you may have noticed all the actors we've had on are local guys. So local actors have to um, work normal jobs during the day. So number one. Number two, to celebrate men's positive contributions to society, community, family, marriage, childcare, and the environment. Okay. Number three, to focus on men's health and well-being, social, emotional, physical, and spiritual. It goes back to what I started talking about this week, but no, feeling lonely and feeling that there's nothing that can be done about it. Number four, to highlight discrimination against men in areas of social services, social attitudes and expectations, and law. Okay, I'll give you that one. Number five, to improve gender relations and promote gender equality. Amen. Amen. That. And number six, to create a safer, better world where people can be safe and grow to reach their full potential. Absolutely, I agree with that. So, all right. But again, this is something I never heard of until yesterday. So, but while I'm here, let's go from something that's trying to do that seems like it's trying to do some good in the world to some guy that's not doing good in the world. This is a streetsblog.org, usa.streetsblog.org on Donnie's second term, breaking his administration seeks to decimate federal transit funding. Sorry about that. That's my phone going off. When you're talking about taking away money from transit, your proposal is flawed from the get-go, says one expert. Uh, this is relevant because, we just had the Main Street extension for our KC streetcar open. We're going to have the riverfront open in a couple months. And we're talking about future lines. And this directly affects future lines because uh, some federal dollars went into getting this thing built in the first place. Um, clearly, we still have a long way to go to improving transit. I don't think buses are. the long-term solution that's been proven over the past few decades. I think rail is the way to go. And if it's, and yeah, part of it is trying to get cars off the street, and try to do as little further damage to our environment as possible. Yeah. So, Kia Wilson is the writer of this. This was published on the 18th. The White House wants Congress to eliminate billions of federal transit money that serves as the backbone of transportation systems across America, and it will hit red states the hardest without even accomplishing the administration's stated goal of stabilizing highway funding and give drivers their fair share, experts warn. Uh, Whatever, dude. Politico's Chris Marquardt, reported late last week that Donnie's administration has advanced a pair of problematic proposals that together would gouge a 30 plus billion-dollar hole in the budgets of transit authorities across America and upend generations of transportation funding precedent. Under the first proposal, policymakers in Congress would write the next major federal transportation bill, which they are racing to pass when the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act expires in September 26th. To exclude the so-called mass transit accounts of the Highway Trust Fund, which was historically res which has historically reserved about 20% of gas tax dollars for transit agencies. That account exists in part out of a recognition that funding transit also helps drivers by shifting motorists out of traffic jams and onto trains and buses, as well as providing a host of direct and indirect benefits for all U.S. residents. Okay, that's a good point. Some people should not be driving, period. They should be taking public transit of some sort, and yeah, if this gets those types of people off the street, great. All right. And this jackass wants to get away, get, wants to do away with it. So, and yeah, that is a problem here. We have uh, I I guess it's been going on the last couple of years. People doing so-called sideshows on major streets. Uh, they recently they recently ruined a newly reconstructed intersection, 75th and Warnell in Waldo. They just finished work on that, and a bunch of idiots decided to do a sideshow in it and ruin the artwork they painted on the whole thing. So this shit needs to stop, of course. But let's continue with the article. So under the second proposal, Congress would strip states' ability to flex their highway funding to transit projects, essentially eliminating local self-determination, which has long been championed by conservatives as a bulwark against federal power. Worse, the two proposals still wouldn't put a dent in the Highway Trust Fund's decades-old deficit, which the Congressional Budget Office projects will swell to roughly 40 billion a year by 27. That deficit has grown in parts because Congress has essentially allowed state transportation departments to keep expanding highways way past the point they can afford to maintain them without increasing the federal gas tax, or other revenues to match. Oh yeah, we got a couple of those projects around here too. Put an expressway in '69 that wasn't needed, and what they're doing on I-70 now. So if the White House proposals advance, experts warn it could deepen car dependency and increase strain on the nation's crumbling roads, as well as spurring car crashes, congestion, and more. At the same time, the move would saddle states that do value transit with staggering new bills to keep those systems running and no clear path to pay them. The proposal will not solve the highway trust fund's issues when it runs out of money. It will only kick the can down the road by about a year, says Corrigan Salerno of Transportation for America. This is not really a red state, blue state thing. All states rely on transit, and really more states that are traditionally thought of as red or rural actually depend on the mass transit account and federal highway funding flexing more than blue urban states do. Not only is this really bad for transit, it just doesn't solve any actual policy issues. Salerno added, eliminating the mass transit account would just fail to solve the budget issue, the federal budget issue. It also puts giant holes in states' budgets. The problem with nuking the mass transit accounts and flex funding. Solano explained that public transit may be coded as a blue state priority in the minds of many right-wing politicians, but federal transit funding disproportionately benefits communities across the political spectrum that can't rely on fares to fund their networks, and those communities in turn are concentrated in red states. Uh, Many rural and suburban communities get upwards of half the money they rely on to run even sparse transit networks from the mass transit accounts, while urban areas get only 11% because they have more robust ridership. In blood red, deeply rural Kansas, for example, a staggering 43% of all cash for transit agencies statewide comes directly from the fund, not including other federal sources of shared transportation monies. That's part of why the mass transit account was created under Reagan in the first place, and why a 2012 GOP proposal to eliminate it was quickly shot down. Part of this, I think, is about getting in a partisan hit, this urban-rural divide that the administration has been trying to hammer on. But it's just truly misleading, misunderstanding the facts that what this mass transit account does. I think this administration assumes that most people don't know where this money goes and who benefits from it the most from it and who will suffer the most if it were gone. Of course, eliminating federal funding for transit doesn't mean that federally reliant transit agencies will all just shut their doors overnight, especially in rural areas where a disproportionately high share of residents rely on buses and trains for their basic needs. It would mean, sorry, I ain't got water yet this morning, so of course, eliminating federal, yeah, basic basic needs. Uh, it would mean that state and local governments would need to pull money from other priorities amongst already stretched thin budgets just to keep people moving or else face the wrath of voters who just lost their only affordable transportation option, employers whose workers can't make it to the job sites, or hospital systems that are overwhelmed with patients as car crashes and pollution-related health conditions continue to mount. There's that. The White House second proposal, meanwhile, would also disproportionately harm the communities that the president pledged to protect the most. For instance, Salerno said that 28% of federal transit expenditures in blue state Vermont were flexed from the state's federal highway formula funds, and in deep red Nevada, though 35% was, because neither state can afford to run its networks on fares and state and local funding sources alone. So, still, because so many of America's transit networks are so sparse, Politico points out that all 50 states flexed transit dollars totals just 1.6 billion in 24, a tiny fraction of total transportation money. States usually don't use flex funding nearly to the extent that they could to support transit, especially considering that most of the federal dollars are being misspent in the first place by not prioritizing repair over expansion. Yeah, you think 69. Um, there's plenty of federal highway dollars to go around, but funding flexibility, both funding flexibility, states are actually able to decide for themselves whether or not they want to be moving towards a more transit-oriented system. A lot of states are doing that, and it's not just the Marylands and Californias and New Yorks of the country. The user pays myth. Perhaps the most galling thing about Donnie's proposals, though, is what its authors claim is motivating them, the so-called user pays principle that highway funds should be spent on highway projects. Solano explains that, contrary to popular belief, U.S. drivers haven't been paying fully for the roads they use since uh, just turn that off. Since 2008, the first time Congress was forced to bail out the Highway Trust Fund after gas taxes failed to cover the costs of the ever-growing highway network. And as states and transportation leaders failed to invest enough money into transit networks that would take pressure off that massively overbuilt system. Oh, geez, 2008. Who was voted into office in 2008 because of Republican mismanagement of the country? In the years since, lawmakers in Washington have had to repeat that bailout an astonishing 9 times, totaling more than 275 rather, 275 billion in general fund appropriations paid for by Americans at large, whether or not they drive. Of course, Congress could have thrown its weight behind the user pays principle at any point over the last 2 decades by increasing the federal gas tax, but it didn't because members of Congress believe that Americans in car-dependent communities would revolt if fuel prices rose. Uh, yeah, that's kind of the one of the points of public transit is that they wouldn't have to. I digress. Seen through this lens, Solano argues that the existence of the mass transit account is, in some ways, the last firewall between the flawed federal transportation program and outright chaos, because it at least gives the third of Americans who can't reliably drive somewhere to show for the billions of dollars in general fund revenues they've been essentially forced to pump into a trust fund that builds endless highways they'll never use. The users pay principle has not been the case in the United States for decades for a reason. The mass transit account has been in place since before most people were in Congress. And part of the reason why we were able to do as much as we do on the federal gas tax is simply because of its inclusion. I don't think that it's really possible to get any consensus around this level of funding again without it. More to the point, Salerno argues that all the fuss about the users pay principle fails to meaningfully challenge what we're getting in exchange for all this money, no matter where the money comes from, where they money. Jeez. The money is going to come from somewhere, and we do need to figure out from where, he added. But the outcomes, will you stop already? But the outcomes for that money matter significantly more than freaking out about whether or not the moral principles of the tax are ideal. What really matters is safety, whether or not the traveling public can rely on the roads in the future because of their state of repair, and whether or not they have the option to take more affordable transportation modes if they need to. I will tell you as someone who, shut the fuck up already, all right? I'll tell you as someone who had to have my car in the shop for months this summer in an area that is unfortunately very car dependent. Yeah, I have yet to see much benefit from the buses around, specifically my area. Uh, meanwhile, uh, meanwhile, yeah, we celebrate the streetcar around here, but it's just one line right now. Uh, Even with the extension, it's all just one solid uh, line. You still have to drive to get there, and well, then, uh, although they did incorporate the buses a bit, but like I said, the buses around here, unless you live in the urban core, are sketchy at best, if existent at all. So, when you're talking about taking away money from transit, which is able to solve all three problems by taking cars and trucks off the road, yep, your proposal is flawed from the get-go. U.S. Department of Transportation and White House did not respond to a request for comment. And the writer lives in St. Louis. That's pretty cool. All right. I'm going to find out what the hell this is going on over here with my phone. And in this blog today, we might, of course, do some more. We have 10 more days of this. So, talk again soon.